All right, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for this special webinar co-hosted by Interfaith Partners for the Chesapeake and FishTalk Magazine, Fishing for Finned Invaders. If you can, please put your name, region, and congregation or organization if you have one in the chat. And before we jump into things, just a quick tech orientation. If you're on Zoom, please keep yourself muted during this presentation. And if you need any help, please use the chat feature to direct message any of our IPC staff for assistance. If you're on Facebook, please feel free to pop any questions that you have into the chat. Our folks from FishTalk England, Chief Lenny Rudo, is there to assist you as well. And this session is being recorded, so please keep your camera off if you do not want your image shown in the recording. So my name is Molly Rudo. I'm the Lower Eastern Shore Outreach Coordinator with Interfaith Partners for the Chesapeake. I was formerly the FishTalk Magazine Fishing Reports Editor for about 4 years. And we also have IPC staff member Natalie with us tonight, who is our Director of Communications and Development. So here's our agenda for the evening. We're going to start off with a land acknowledgement and opening reflection. Then we'll move into a thank you for our sponsors, partners, and funders. We'll introduce FishTalk Magazine, as well as Interfaith Partners for the Chesapeake. And then we'll meet our panelists, Dr. Noah Bressman and Eric Packard. We'll have a discussion and Q&A, and then we'll have a closing reflection. And at any time, again, please feel free to put questions into the chat box, including the panelists that you would like to ask. Now, please hold space with me today as we acknowledge the lands and waters on which we are. Today, we hold space for reflection on and gratitude for the land upon which we live and the local waters that support and nourish us all. We recognize that this land and these waters were beloved by many who came before. We reflect together as people of faith in response to the calling of our hearts to come alongside the original stewards of this land and these waters that sustain us all. We seek to change the narrative of this story, our story, towards one of harmony with the gifts of creation and all living beings. We ask you to honor and learn from their intimate connection, love, and appreciation for these sacred lands and waters. And thank you for holding that space with me. Now we're going to have our opening reflection, which is a poem by Steve Ward. He's one of the two Ward brothers, Lem and Steve, who pioneered the art of decoy carving in Crisfield. This is Contentment. How good God is to me, he said, although I have no mansion tall. I have a shanty by the shore, where I can hear the wild goose call. No wealth of fame I claim is mine, but just a lot of little things. And when night comes, I bow my head and realize I am king. And I love that poem because I think it really speaks to the fact that we can all take small actions for the Bay. And of course, thank you so much to all of our partners and funders. Thank you, FishTalk, for being here with us tonight. Thank you to the Chesapeake Bay Trust and NIFWIF and the Chesapeake Bay Program for funding this program. And just a little bit about FishTalk Magazine. So FishTalk is your go-to spot for how-to, where-to fishing information. Everything from kayak angling to fishing on the fly. You'll find articles on here ranging from beginner to advanced angling, as well as up-to-date fishing reports. So these reports come out weekly around noon. You can get them in your inbox, and you can always check up on here for the most recent fishing reports by region covering the Chesapeake Bay. And you can also find the FishTalk fishing reports in their print magazine, which comes out monthly. And a little bit about IPC. So we're forming faithful stewards and caring for sacred waters. And we do so by connecting environmental partners, local governments, and faith communities. So we see ourselves as a translator and connector that brings all of these different aspects of organizations together to do primarily stormwater quality improvement work. And so every little red dot on this map is one of our partner pledge congregations. So they're committed to faithful stewardship with the Chesapeake Bay. And we do our work through the One Water Partnership, which is a program through which we're building a network of congregations in each region of the Chesapeake Bay who are committed to caring for the Bay itself. We also offer a Faithful Green Leaders training. We've trained over 150 teams, and Faithful Green Leaders training is really just a wonderful way to get your congregation involved in creation care and start caring for the Bay. And please check out our website. We have a ton of available resources from Blessing of a Waterway to Faithful Lawn Care, resources on pollinators, environmental justice, and just all sorts of helpful things on there. And so without further ado, I'm so glad to introduce our first speaker for tonight, Dr. Noah Bressman. Dr. Bressman is coming to us from Salisbury University, where he's an Assistant Professor of Physiology on the Eastern Shore of Maryland. His research interests include fish biology, functional morphology, biomechanics, and behavior, with a special focus on recreationally important fish species, how amphibious fishes navigate terrestrial environments, and the invasive fish species. Dr. Bressman is on a mission to catch every species of fish. He's currently at 450 species. Additionally, Dr. Bressman is an artist that uses photography, Photoshop, and a biochemical technique called clearing and staining to create skeletal images of vertebrates. And without further ado, Dr. Bressman, take it away.
Can you all hear me? Okay. Hi, thanks for the introduction, Molly. So, like Molly said, my lab is researching invasive species at Salisbury University. But what are invasive species? That's kind of the first question. We need to first define invasive species before I can go on what we're doing. But to define invasive species, I first have to describe what a native species is and kind of go from there. A native species is something that is in its natural habitat range. It hasn't been moved. What was that? A native species is one that is in its natural habitat that has not been introduced from one area to another. It's native to the environment, like striped bass, American shad, Atlantic sturgeon. All those things are native to the Chesapeake Bay. Now, things that are non-native are things that are introduced. They include blue catfish, snakehead, goldfish, common carp, grass carp, and some other species. Now, sometimes a non-native fish could just be somebody released a pet fish from their fish tank into the wild, then it was immediately caught by somebody else and removed. And that's a non-native fish where it's not quite considered invasive, because for something to be invasive, it needs to have an established population and not just a transient individual caught accidentally here or there and only one. It needs to have a reproducing population, and it needs to have some form of negative effect on people, whether it's people or the ecosystem, whether it's native species, like striped bass and blue crabs, whether it is harming people, like, oh, these things give people diseases, that'd be a harmful invasive species, or whether it's people just don't like them for whatever reason and they want to get rid of them for ecosystem. That big issue, the big classification difference between invasive and non-native is really that harm and the perceived harm. For example, largemouth bass are not native to Maryland. They're native to the Mississippi, which is in the US, but it's still not native to Maryland. So they've been introduced over here. However, they've been here for so long that they've been what's known as naturalized, where all the possible damage they could have done for the ecosystem has balanced out, and now they've come into a new ecosystem where they're not having massively disruptive effects. Meanwhile, things like blue catfish and snakehead and common carp, goldfish, all those things are not at the stage of largemouth bass. Other than common carp, the snakehead, blue catfish, and goldfish are relatively recent to the Chesapeake Bay, whereas the common carp came about a few hundred years ago. The channel catfish came about a couple hundred years ago. Those are naturalized. Maybe some people consider the common carp invasive because it muddies the water, which impacts plants that are important for a fish habitat, as well as influences the way visual predators feed. If it's muddier water, they have trouble feeding. But we're really going to focus on a couple species here, and those will be the snakeheads, flatheads, and blue catfish. A quick little tidbit about goldfish. So goldfish are a classic example of an invasive species that is released because of people simply letting them go in an environment that they're not native to. Everybody's had a goldfish probably. A lot of times goldfish live a long time, and or they get too big for their tank and people don't want them to keep them anymore. And so they just release the goldfish or whatever other species they've got into the environment. And now it's not part of that native ecosystem. It puts things out of balance. It disrupts the ecosystem. Maybe it eats something that didn't have a predator before, so that thing has is going down. Maybe it is introducing new diseases to the environment that weren't found there. Things like that. Maybe it's poisonous and things are trying to eat this new fish, and then they're dying trying to eat it. And so that's why it's really important not to release pet fish into the environment. You can often give them to a pet store, and pet store would happily take that fish because they could sell it for free, because they could sell it to somebody else. If you don't know where to go, you can also just give me your pet fish that you don't want anymore instead of releasing to the environment, because I can use them for research and education. Now that brings us to the snakehead, which is thought to either be released also as a pet. They used to be pets in the U.S., but not anymore because now we found out, like now they've been introduced, so we don't want to continue them spreading. So we're limiting the availability of snakeheads. And they were also thought perhaps that they were usually transported alive in the live fish markets, particularly around DC area, where because they can breathe air and survive a lot of conditions, they can stay very fresh in a bucket with little to no water in a fish market for a while. And so because they were readily transported alive and around, they got released somehow into first in Crofton Pond in Crofton, Maryland, and then they spread to other places with subsequent introductions. With snakeheads, a big thing that's leading to their range expansion is some people really like catching them and eating them. They're fun fish to catch and they taste good. So I understand that aspect of it, but they eat native species. And so, and which can cause harmful effects on the ecosystem. Like they may eat some of the blue crabs, some striped bass, white perch, things like that. And so, but some people like to focus on they taste good and fight hard. And so they're like, I caught a snakehead over here, but I want to bring him to a pond closer to me. And then they release it to that new area. And that's how a lot of snakeheads are spreading from illegal introductions of people moving them around. It's illegal to do that. You can get fined and go to jail if you do that. So please don't do that. But that's how snakeheads spread around a lot. I'll go into a little bit more about snakehead biology a little bit, but also discuss blue catfish and where they come from. Blue catfish, well, and flathead catfish are originally from the Mississippi River system, some areas of the deep South, or was the Midwest. Things like Oklahoma, Texas, Mississippi, Louisiana, they're native to there. Whereas the snakeheads are native to Eastern Asia. But despite being closer nearby, the blue catfish are outcompeting the native white catfish, as well as the brown bullhead. What you can see, the brown bullhead is the one next to is the middle one, the middle right one up top, the one to the right of the flathead catfish, which looks like a flathead catfish, although it's got a smaller head. It doesn't have the underbite that the flathead catfish has, and there's some other subtle differences. So mostly the thing is, flatheads get over 10 times bigger than the bullheads. But flathead and blue catfish were introduced in the 70s to the Virginia side of the bay into a few tributaries of rivers. Back when the bay was pretty dead, there was a lot of pollution, a lot of overfishing, not much fish left. And so fisheries managers in Virginia, nobody really knew what invasive species were at this time, but fisheries managers in Virginia thought, hey, there's nothing alive here. Maybe we should release these blue catfish into these rivers to give anglers something to catch because they get big, they fight hard, they taste good. But they can survive all sorts of conditions, so they'll probably survive in the polluted bay. And then they released, but they thought that they wouldn't be able to handle the saltiness of the bay, and so they would be confined to the river and be able to spread around. Turns out they could handle the saltiness of the bay pretty well. And so they don't prefer to be out in the middle bay, but sometimes they'll catch it. But they were able to work their way up and around the bay and got to the eastern shore about 20 years ago where they're still spreading. Flathead catfish, so some of it may be in some areas may have been intentional introduction by fisheries managers around the same time. Other ones are anglers transporting these and moving them around different places. Like let's say somebody from Maryland went to Mississippi and loved catching flathead catfish. Some of them are thought to maybe brought some of them back, released them to their nearby bodies of water, and then they started reproducing, spreading. Can you go to the next slide? I'm going to go in a little bit deeper dive into blue catfish first. So here you can see the native region for blue catfish. It's all in yellow. That's where they're naturally around. But you can see kind of the darker red. That's where they're not native. That's where they've been introduced. And you can see that this map probably needs to be updated a little bit. They've spread out a little bit more, like more throughout the eastern shore and the Chesapeake Bay. But you can see some areas that they've been in some of the areas they've been introduced. A big problem with the catfish is they get really big. So they get over 10 times larger than the native white catfish and bullhead catfish. So you can see some of my students at Salisbury University holding that one. That one happens to be 52 pounds. And they can get almost 3 times larger than that. The world record is 143 pounds. However, we age this fish to be 18 years old, which aligns roughly with about 20 years ago when they first got here. And so it shows that the largest individuals are the oldest, are the ones that got here 20 years ago. So they haven't been here long enough to reach their maximum size. So we still haven't seen perhaps the worst damage of these blue catfish. But something my lab is doing to help with this is we're working with the Department of Natural Resources, and we go electrofishing to help remove these catfish. So as you can see down below, that's my graduate student, Zach Crum, we're electrofishing with the DNR. Electrofishing is basically you put some electricity in a water in a controlled way with a specialized boat that basically tasers the fish around you, stuns them electrically, does not kill them, allows you to scoop up the fish as they float by that you want. And then the fish like the native fish, like striped bass, you let them keep floating away. Then you turn the electricity off and everything wakes up everything wakes up and swims away. But that's why we have these nets to scoop the catfish out. And snakeheads, if we get a shot of them. Snakeheads don't stun as well. So they basically just get angry and you have one shot when they jump out of the water. You have to try to scoop them out of the air. The catfish, they float up pretty well. And so we scoop them up and remove them from the rivers. And then once we've got them, we do a variety of research projects. Can you go to the next slide? Can you press a couple animations? Let's just get all the images up there. I'll talk all about once. Perfect, thanks. So some of the things we're doing first is we know they're here. We know they must be eating something, but what are they eating? So a project we're finishing up right now is looking at their diet of blue catfish, where we analyze the diets of over 1,000 catfish that had prey items in their stomach, both visually, where we would cut open their stomach, see what's inside. And we also do something called stable isotope analysis. So stable isotope analysis basically looks at everything has a certain chemical signature based on whatever they eat, where their chemical signature, a predator's chemical signature is going to be similar to the chemical signature of their prey, but just a little bit concentrated because they've been incubating multiple prey items. And so by taking tissue samples from the fish that we catch and from a variety of prey items around the area, we can figure out we can match the isotopes and match that chemical signature to figure out what prey items are making the largest portion of the diet of these fish. And that allows us to peek beyond just the single meal that we happen to catch in the stomach of these catfish. It allows us to see a more long-term view of diet. But looking at gut contents, so cutting open their stomachs, is very helpful to see immediately in the short term and confirm what we're seeing with the isotope data. And we're finding that the 4 things the blue catfish love to eat the most are blue crabs, white perch, gizzard shad, and threatened river herring like alewives and blueback herring. And now many of you may not care about gizzard shad. Some people call them mud shad and things like that. But those they're native, but they're a very abundant prey species. But those other ones, the threatened river herring, white perch, blue crabs. I mean, what's Maryland without blue crabs? And so that's a big problem. And estimates that we're still preliminary looking at are showing that they're eating millions of crabs per year out of the Chesapeake Bay, which is obviously problematic for the crab population and maybe why the crab population is declining. However, we're also seeing striped bass, like you see in the top right. That was a 19-inch striped bass or rockfish that was found in the stomach of a 30-inch blue catfish, showing that with their big mouths, they can eat big diets. And so they're also eating striped bass. They're eating, the bottom right is a adult wood duck we found in the stomach of a blue catfish. We've a whole duck, which we think it ate live, so it's showing that they're not just bottom feeders, they're active predators. And we also found other things like turtles, sunfish, yellow perch, shiners, killifish, vegetation. We found turkey necks in one of in them. Probably somebody using them as bait. Rock, stick, mud. They're what's known as opportunistic generalists. Meaning opportunistic is they'll take advantage of whatever meal they can get, and generalists meaning they're not picky on what they'll eat. They'll just eat whatever is most abundant. And so things like blue crabs and white perch are very abundant in the Chesapeake Bay, and so they're going to eat a lot more of them. Something else we're seeing is that these catfish are coming with these unusual diseases. And maybe when they're introduced, they introduce some new diseases. Like in the left, you can see that catfish have these blisters. And my lab is taking tissue samples to try to identify these diseases and see if they pose a threat to other animals around here. Something else we're also doing is, remember that big catfish from the previous slide? My lab is working to age these fish so we can match their age to their size, to figure out growth rates, to figure out how quickly they're growing, just to learn more about, basically learn more about what we're up against as we're dealing with this threat. Can you go to the next slide? So shifting gears to snakeheads a little bit. So I started researching snakeheads actually back when I was doing my PhD at Wake Forest University, where I'm not sure if you could play that video again. These snakeheads are able to move over land, potentially between bodies of water. Now they don't. When they first discovered, there was a lot of fear that they're going to come onto land and eat people and puppies and babies. You don't need to worry about that. There was a bunch of terrible sci-fi horror movies that came out all around 2004 when they were first discovered. Or the early 2000s, there's a variety of them, and some came out more recently, these movies. But they can't come onto land and eat people. They can move at least several feet over land at a time, and they can also breathe air and survive out of water for over a day. So it shows that they perhaps can move further distances if given enough time, and they may be able to move over land between one body of water to another. And so my lab is trying to figure out what conditions cause them to move to leave the water. It usually seems to be poor water quality, and trying to figure out where they go on land and how they may be able to disperse into new bodies of water over land. The prime way they're getting into new bodies of water seems to be people introducing them, but it's even them moving from one body of water to another body of water could be into a new major river system where they can then spread even further. In addition to these, my lab is also looking into the diet of snakeheads and their growth rate, and doing some stable isotope analysis to learn more about their ecology. But we're in the preliminary stages of that. Some things I can share from that is we do know that they're eating some migratory species like those river herring. We don't know how many yet they're eating, but we know that they're eating some of them. And we know that they're in general eating some marine resources based on those chemical signatures, showing that they are eating things that migrate in and out of the river, and maybe they go down and eat things like crabs and things like that you wouldn't normally just find in a pond. And with that, I think I'm happy to answer any questions, or we can move on to the next segment.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dr. Bressman. I know I just learned a whole lot that I didn't know about both blue catfish and snakehead. Just that wood duck is so shocking. We'll do Q&A at the end. If you have any questions, please feel free to put them into the chat, whether you're on Facebook or Zoom now, and we'll make sure that we get to them after Eric has presented. So without further ado, I'm happy to introduce Eric Packard. Eric is a FishTalk Magazine contributor, and he's in his second term as commissioner to the Maryland Sport Fisheries Advisory Commission. Eric represents the tidal and non-tidal recreational anglers in Southern Maryland where he resides. Additionally, he is a contributing writer to FishTalk Magazine, providing content with respect to kayak fishing, shoreline fishing, and weekly reports with respect to his fishing around the Chesapeake Bay region, fresh and saltwater. Eric is a self-taught artist, making a variety of art each day, including oil paintings, ink or pencil drawings, and oil pastels. He sells his art out of his online store, Apple Green Arts. And Eric, take it away.
How you guys doing? Hey, Dr. Bressman, you want to help me with this? Because I know you fish for these fish as well.
Sure, happy to help.
Okay, cool. Hey, we'll start with blue cats. They are actually very easy to catch. You may know that, Doctor. I was actually, but before I go on, I was actually fishing the upper Potomac River up above 301, up above the Wilson Bridge. Actually went all the way up close to Fletcher's, and we were fishing there during, right now is the herring run, and they're all going up that way. We were trying to catch these fish using cut mud, shad, and alwai, but we couldn't get a bite to save our lives because I think, you may be able to tell me this, they were probably focusing on the herring or the river herring that are spawning at the time and eating them. They were just dissing our food because other times they're just constantly eating the cut alwai and the mud shad and things like that.
Yeah. So what we were seeing is basically going back to them being opportunistic generalists, they're going to eat whatever is most abundant, easiest to get, and most nutritious around them. And during the spawning run for the herring, that's when they all start feeding on that's when this big rush of food comes into the river. And sure, you may get a bite here and there, but when they have all this other food, it kind of dilutes the effect of your bait in the area, where you're less likely to get less likely to bite your bait as it is to get a different shad that's in front of its face, a different herring.
Yeah, I know that during the pre and afterward, a lot of people fish up there at Fletcher's area and catch really large catfish and flatheads. They're catching some really big fish. And for me, the way I like to fish for them, well, the easiest way to fish for them is using a slider rig where you have a weight on a slides on your line. You put slider on it, and then you put your swivel snap. I like to use a barrel swivel, and then like a number 4 or 5 hook, circle hook, in case I end up catching a striped bass or something like that. And then just casting out and looking for channel edges or looking for snags, fishing around those. Slower water, I like to catch them in there. But my favorite is to fish in like the upper Mattawoman, upper Patuxent River, and off of the Potomac River up at Mallows Bay. And what I like to throw up there are either crankbaits or chatterbaits. And I can catch fish all day long. Pardon?
For the catfish?
Oh, yeah.
You get on the chatterbaits. Wow, nice. We only get on the eastern shore on lures. Sometimes they got to be in the right mood.
No, I'm just throwing a chatterbait on them, and they will eat that. And what I like to do is put 2 rods out and like troll. If you go to Mallows Bay, go out to the wrecks, you'll see the big steel ship, the old ferry, and then just troll from there, following the line. It's probably anywhere, depends upon the tide. It may be 6 foot to 4 foot to, it could be, 7 feet water. But anyway, just troll slowly, and you just pick a fish up, pick up a fish here, pick up a fish there, or just fan cast for them. Or on the upper Patuxent, I can do that as well. I'll fan cast, look for a creek maybe coming in, looking for it's all tidal as well, these areas are. So I play the tides on it. If the tide's coming out, I'll shoot the channel edges. If the tide's coming up, I'll do little flats behind snags and things like that and find them. And I artificially cast artificials on them. I catch more fish casting artificials. It's a blast. Yeah.
And in addition to I've got them on lures sometimes. It's hit or miss on the lures, but they'll usually go for either fresh bait, where like cut mud shad, cut gizzard shad, really any cut fish they'll go for. But even if you're low on bait, you got things in the pantry. I've got them on hot dogs, sausages, bacon, raw chicken, chicken livers, you name it. They like savory. They like savory, specifically based on some research. And the chemical they're most attracted to is L-alanine. So it's an amino acid, which basically means they like savory things.
Okay.
Unlike carpet things that like sweet. If you got soak a bait in tomato juice or something like that. That's savory. All these things, they are attracted to anything savory. And so bread can sometimes work on them, but maybe if you got like a cheese bread or something like that, then they'll go for that too.
We went out to fish for Washington once, and a friend of mine, we were going to be on his boat. He had a cooler that he had cut albawi in. Anyway, so we were driving up there. We get up there. Apparently, he didn't secure his cooler down because when we got there, we had no bait.
Yeah.
But what we found a trash bag near the trash can that had 3 dead catfish in it. So we loaded up 2 of the catfish, cut them up, and we were just catching catfish on catfish.
Oh yeah, we've seen a lot of cannibalism in their diet too, because they're the most abundant thing in the rivers. They're going to start eating each other a little bit.
Yeah. Especially if they'll start eating the smaller ones, the bigger ones. They're trying to survive and do what they want to do. Another fun thing to do is, you ever do any jug fishing?
Yeah, I went with a commercial waterman, Dr. David Confair, Cornflower, if you've heard of him. He took me out jug fishing. It was an interesting. It was a fun experience. Like you throw a bunch out, you're drifting, like looking everything. It's pretty it's more active than I thought it would be.
Yeah, we
Especially-
Zach Dittmar and I, he took his nephew Brooke out, took my grandson out, and we only dropped 4 off a side. You have to put your number on there, your DNR ID number, and the season's from July 1 through February 28th. I guess that's to protect probably the striped bass run to make sure you're not hurting into them. And all we did was I just took that 4 foot of line, put a number 4 hook on it with a, what is this? It's a 2 ounce weight, and just put some alwine on them, drop them off, and just wait. And then they'll start drifting. You'll just see them moving. It's not like you catch jaws and it's rushing through the water. They just kind of like bounce around a little bit, start moving around. In fact, I think Zach actually painted a couple of them yellow, like the canisters they used on jaws, because we were doing the video, but which is cool. But what I found odd with it is that they'll take the bait, they'll get hooked, you row over to pick the jug up, and then we just wind it up and you hand line them in. And hand lining them in is a whole lot different than on rod and reel. They, I don't think, realize that they're hooked until they see the boat. And then they'll start acting up some on you, and then you scoop them up with the net and you got them. It's a blast if you want to do something that's family oriented during the summertime. And you can probably do it basically any of the tributaries in the southern part of Maryland. I guess they go all the way up to the Susquehanna now. You can do it up there too. But get some, get a small boat out, get some kayaks out, throw some jugs over. You can do, I think, 10 a person, and just harvest the animals. It's a fun, great outing. So, where do you fish for them at?
So I'm over here. Mostly we go on the Nanticoke River, just because that's our study site. So wherever we get any fish we get, we can use it for our research. But we go for the Nanticoke and the Marshy Hope. All sorts of, like, you go around structure, you go around deep bends of the river. They like nice drop-offs and structure. You can find them like around bridges. That's a great place to go for catfish easily. Like you can get we've gone electric fishing at some of these bridges, and I'm not exaggerating. Some of these bridges have literally thousands and thousands and thousands of catfish per bridge piling, especially in the summer, where it's astonishing and terrifying how much of them there are here. But I also sometimes go in the Pocomoke River. That's where I get them on lures when I'm going for striped bass in the summer. And when you get any 20-pound fish on a swim bait, you're having a good time.
Yeah, fun stuff. I know a lot of the guys I know that fish for them, and they're looking for big fish, especially around Fort Washington, where the channel edge drops off right there off the point by the lighthouse. You can catch some big fish there, and they like to fish with white perch. They'll catch white perch and go up there and then put the perch on the line and just. I think they're not live lining them. They're frozen, and then they just hook them up and fish from that way.
Yeah, but, I've got them on perch too, and sometimes, like I said before, they're not picky. But sometimes they'll be in a mood where they're feeling one thing over another thing. And sometimes they'll have to change baits around, but other times they'll eat anything. They'll eat anything meaty. They'll eat anything. They eat vegetation too. So we see a lot of these, like, if you know what tuckahoe is, the seeds that floating around in the summer. Especially the smaller ones, like the ones that are 1.5 feet and smaller, love eating that stuff. They'll see clams and all that stuff, and they're not picky, but they're not usually picky. But sometimes you just gotta change baits around, depending on their mood, whether they're feeling more white perch or more gizzard shad. Sometimes they're in a mood just like us. Like sometimes, like, I'm feeling pizza.
I noticed that fishing a chatterbait for them, and I always use a 4-inch white. Take the skirt off and just use the white plastic on it, paddle tail. Yeah. But sometimes if you're trolling them, they'll catch them. But if they're not doing that, what you can do is fan cast out and jig it off the bottom so it'll flutter and let it set. If you wait, they'll come up and eat it. You'd be really surprised how they'll see it movement, then they'll come up and use our barbels, whatever feel where it's at, and grab and eat it.
Yeah. So it's fish have a what's known as a lateral line sense. So the lateral line basically is line along your side that it's basically special touch receptors that can feel vibrations in the water. So they can just, even from a distance, they can sense the vibration of that chattering head, and they can determine the direction and the origin of that and follow that to that. But those white chatterbaits too, they're not just good for blue catfish. They work great for snakeheads. I got one on a snakehead.
It's a great lead. That's a great lead, because I use the white chatterbait just like I do for the catfish. I like fishing those. It depends on where I'm fishing. If I'm fishing the blackwater, I can catch a lot of the snakehead when the tide is down and the fish are forced off the shoreline a little bit and into the lily pads or the grasses, and cast parallel to it, bring my bait along, stop, let it drift down, let it stop and fall. Or if I'm going, let's say I'm fishing point A area, but I know I've caught fish down at point C and I'm going to go down there, I may as well troll a chatterbait, and you'll be surprised how many fish you'll pick up on a short troll going down, because they're they pick up the vibration and the flash, whatever, and then they'll just eat it. Pretty cool. And with snakehead, I always, on my rods, I keep a chatterbait, a topwater frog bait, and a swim bait, either a weighted one or non-weighted one. And it depends upon the situation, because you have to be always keep your ears and eyes open. You'll see a swirl, or if they're in a spawn, you'll see the air bubbles from the fry ball, or you'll hear them splashing off in the distance someplace. And I've caught plenty of these fish I'll see them come up and take a breath, make a spin, and go back down, cast a chatterbait beyond it, bring it up through there, and they'll usually just take it and eat it right away.
Oh yeah, especially like with those lily pads, like on the outgoing, not just the low tide. I find even fishing the outgoing tide, as those lily pads are draining, you find those like little channels where it drains into, and then those snakeheads just kind of wait in there as things are draining out, just gobbling them up. But yeah, when I go snake fishing, I always got a chatterbait rig, swim bait. My go-to colors are white or chartreuse, but sometimes they're more for feeling black or red. It really depends on their mood a little bit. But I'll have a chatterbait with a swim bait trailer. I'll have a frog or buzzbait or some type of topwater at least one, and then I'll have a swim bait that I can bounce. If they're feeling a little slower, I'll bounce the swim bait up and down, fish it a little slower. And also like spinners, like both there's just little spinners where you can just more
like little maps, or if one lake over here, I can only catch them on this one lake. It's a tidal lake, and I can only catch them on a large beetle spin.
Yeah, no, they love flash, they love movement, they love color, and so I get them on spinner baits, like either MEPS or like inline spinner baits, or those bigger wire spinner baits. Anything with a spinner too, that works too. Like sometimes I'll do like instead of a swim bait, I'll bounce a Ned rig around, but have a tail spinner at the end of the Ned rig. So I bounce it up and just flutters down with a nice spinning thing, and they find it nice and attractive. Or I'll use like a swim bait with an underspin or things like that too.
Yeah. If I'm fishing a swim bait, weighted one or non-weighted one, non-weighted ones, I like this, cast them right on the shoreline and pull it off the shoreline, because some of these fish are sitting right up in a foot, 2 feet of the shoreline in shallow water, breathing and doing their thing, and they'll hit the bait there. But if you wake a swim bait right underneath the surface through the pads or through the grass, they'll come up and grab it too. Or as I'm bringing through, if I don't get bit, a lot of times I'll get bit if I stop at the end of the demarcation line between open water and the pads and just let it drop there to the bottom, and they'll either pick it on the drop or right off the bottom once it hits the bottom. And then, false points too, points that are just lily pad points. If you cast across, drop the bait down there too.
Absolutely, just like it's like right along those points, they'll stay in those lily pads waiting to ambush things as they're coming around, following the corner, turn that blind turn, and then they're ready to ambush. Also get them around like some like woody structure and things like that. You get mixed with bass. Basically, if you're very beginner to snakehead fishing, I would just say just go out to an area where there are snakeheads and go bass fishing. You'll get around structure, get on lily pads, similar baits. It's a good way to get into it, and you'll find
some fields, the whole 9 yards. I use the same technique as I'm fishing for bass, but I like to stick to white baits or a green, yellow chartreuse type of color bait, and I fish the shallow areas as if I'm fishing shallow water bass. You know, when because bass will come up into shallow water all year round. In the wintertime, if they're chasing bait, if there's a warm up, they'll move up and feed in the shallow water and then go back out and so forth and so on. So, but with snakehead, the seasons are a little bit different. I don't have much, well, I don't really target them in the wintertime because I'm doing other things, but I believe you can catch them on minnows year round, you know, minnow under a bottle.
You can catch them on minnows like late fall and like early spring. Like if they're really feeding slow, they'll go minnows.
Yeah.
But they will like during the winter when it gets real cold, they'll go and like kind of burrow into the mud a little bit, like kind of bury themselves in the bottom of the mud.
Yeah.
And they don't really feed much during the winter.
Yeah,
so there everyone gets like a stray one here and there, but like as it's getting colder, or I guess as it's getting colder in the fall and just starting to warm up in the spring, live bait is what you can use to entice them if the feeding is slow.
I've actually seen them eating other snakehead. They'll actually attack a snakehead fry ball. I've actually caught fish, the parents off of it, and then we'll catch one that's attacking it. I was fishing a small area over here. It was a beaver pond, beaver dam, and they had mud dams on it. Along the way, beavers build within the ponds. They build these little barriers along the way. And I was fishing and I caught the snakehead parents off of it, and the fry ball rushed over toward this little mud embankment and started fleeing over the top of it into water on the other side. Once I caught that other third snakehead, they started going back over the other direction. I don't know how they knew, but they were actually going back to where the original water they came out of. It was really bizarre.
A homing behavior where they're
must have been
like enough danger's passed. Let's see, maybe the danger's gone. Let's go back home and check the throat.
Yeah, see if I can find mom and dad.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
It's
hey guys, I'm gonna jump in here with a question from Kevin. I think it's pretty timely based on what we're talking about. So Kevin's asking, based on the fishing reports that I've read in the last 12 to 18 months, it appears that the population expansion of snakehead has leveled off, but the blue catfish population is still expanding at an alarming pace. Are you aware of any studies that may confirm or rebuke that conclusion? And are you finding that you're catching more of either species when you target them, for both of you?
Absolutely, there's more blue catfish than snakeheads around. In some estimates we've got show in some tributaries, blue catfish make up about 75% of the biomass in the river. So if you were to take a giant net and scoop everything out of the river, including the plankton, everything living out of the river, including the plankton, the plants, everything, 75% of all of that by weight is blue catfish, which shows that there's just so much blue catfish there that they're just having such massive effects on everything. Snakeheads, it's a little harder to tell their population because they're hard to assess their population. Instead of just being out in the middle of a river, they are hiding up in lily pads up against the shore in areas that it's hard to see. However, I think their population is still spreading around. In some areas, their numbers are increasing, like especially ponds that they've only recently been introduced to. But because snakeheads are such fun to catch and people like to go bow fishing for them too, and hook and line fishing for them, it seems like while they're spreading geographically, people are helping keep their population numbers down. Not like where if we were to stop catching them, I think their populations would come back up. But because people are helping reduce, are catching them, that's helping control their population. And so I guess when I say with invasive species, I like to say that the best way to fight them is to eat them all to death. Whether where just catching them and eating invasive species we can act as the predators in that scenario, keeping their populations in check to limit the negative effects they would have on the native population.
And with the blue cats, there are commercial fishers that are going out after these fish and selling them. But I talked to a couple of them, and they're not keeping anything over 5 pounds because it's hard for them to sell a big fish. They want fillet-sized fish and down below that. So I'm not, but there may be some specialized people that are keeping some bigger fish because they're putting them in nets and selling them to the guys in the Midwest for their fishing ponds, the Pay Lakes and things like that. But with respect to snakehead, I've noticed personally that you're seeing them more in the marsh ponds and things like that. Because I've actually had people report to me, and I've seen them myself in some brackish waters where they're traveling up and then getting into fresher water, and then they go as far as they can away from the brackish water into fresher waters and shallower, muddier bottom grass waters.
Yeah, snakeheads don't prefer both snakeheads and blue catfish can tolerate brackish water a little bit. Snakeheads, they get tolerated, but snakeheads dislike brackish water more than the blue catfish, so they'll kind of move more into those fresher areas and those vegetated areas.
Yeah.
But going off of the blue catfish commercial fishery, there is a commercial fishery for it, but it's currently not enough to make a dent in the population. Some estimates showing that we need some estimates showing that we need to remove about 15 million pounds of blue catfish from the Chesapeake Bay per year to have a dent in their population, to get their population even, not to get it go down, but to get it even instead of still increasing.
To stabilize
right now, we're only at about 1 or 2 million pounds per year. So
wow.
catfish population is still increasing.
Have the folks in Virginia, have they done any studies on these blue cats? Because they've been there since the 70s in the John Rappahannock and the James and stuff like that. And I know they put them there for a sport fish animal, but I would think that they would notice a drop of other, or have they done any studies on understanding the population has dropped and where it's gone?
Yeah, so I'm blanking on so are you saying populations of catfish or the prey species?
The native species.
Yeah. So there was a study I know came a couple of years ago. I forget, it's either the James or the York River, where based on estimates of catfish abundance and based on things like the gut content analysis, basically people cutting open and looking at the stomachs, and in that tributary, in the river mouth as it went into the bay, they found that on average each blue catfish ate about 1 to 1.5 blue crabs per day, and based on the abundance of blue catfish in those rivers, they're likely eating about 2.5 million crabs per year just out of that one portion of that one river and estuary. So spread that all across the whole Chesapeake Bay, that's a lot, but that was empirical evidence like, yeah, they're eating a lot of crabs. However, Virginia takes a little different approach. Some people in Virginia, some tributaries in Virginia, blue catfish are managed as a trophy fishery, where there's a limit to how many big fish you can keep, because they want to have the bigger ones out there for people to catch. And that brings into the question, kind of the point I was making earlier, where what's the difference between a non-native naturalized fish versus an invasive fish? And it's kind of society decides what is invasive versus just non-native, where sure, like if we as a society decide that we want to have giant blue catfish here and nothing else, we can make that decision. Is it the best decision for the ecosystem? Probably not. Can we catch some big fish? Probably. But then you'll have less striped bass and blue crabs. But that's the thing. It's like, we got to weigh the pros and cons, which people want more. And it's not for me to unilaterally decide. It's for decided anglers, people, not just like anglers, but people who eat these fish, people who buy them in markets, people who enjoy eating blue crabs that are affected by this fish. So there's a lot of stakeholders at play. And personally, I think that we shouldn't have a trophy fishery for blue catfish in the bay, just because they're causing so much damage unequivocally, where it's like, sure, we got a few big blue catfish, but we're not going to have any blue crabs or striped bass or perch or anything like that if we just let the catfish win and protect the catfish.
I agree.
Yeah, and I got another question for you guys. It's a follow-up on the catfish. Do either of you have any idea why blue cats sometimes seem to shut down based on pressure changes and fronts? And that's from Lenny on Facebook. Yep.
In general, a lot of fish are sensitive to like atmospheric pressure and things like that, where storms are approaching or just storms happen. Like before storms, pressure shifts, they can sense it. They can sense the pressure shifts, and really any shift in like dramatic shift in environmental conditions can cause them to just kind of shut down feeding in general, just because it's still don't know quite no reasons why, but it's studied in many other species where perhaps the storms come in, so they're going to, instead of focus on feeding, focus on getting to like a safe area of a river where they can be safer and not get washed away or battered. Things like that.
I notice fishing wise in general, doesn't matter if I'm fishing for largemouth bass, crappie, snakehead, or blue cats or whatever I'm fishing. Fish like stability in the weather. They don't like changes in the weather. If you get a quick change, they shut down. if you got a pressure coming in, they shut down. But you can play on some of that because some fish will eat year round or during those time frames as well. You'll catch fewer fish, but like if you got a storm moving in, pressure, you got winds pushing up on a shoreline, plankton, small fish are pushing on the shoreline. The predatory fish then will follow them to those shorelines to points to, just think like a fish. Think where they're going to possibly be sitting at and waiting for a meal. Fish don't want to expend any energy to eat. They're lazy. They want to sit still if they can in a current or out of a current, like on a point. They like to sit down below, wait for the food to come over top, rise up, eat it, go back down, and then escape from, like largemouth bass. They want to get away from the other bass and want to steal their food as well. So think like a fish. Think kind of that way. You'll catch fewer fish, but you might still catch fish.
Yeah. And this goes to the, sorry, go ahead.
Pressure is just one of those things, is one of many factors that can influence fish feeding. So sometimes maybe the pressure is like, the pressure change is not good for the feeding, but the moon phase and the tides all happen to line up, and there's like migratory fish coming in, and then that may outweigh the pressure. So it's just like fishing, it's all sorts of different factors coming in where sometimes they will outweigh others, but in generally, I see pressure, like rapid and strong pressure changes things up, whether maybe you could still get fish, but they're feeding in a little bit different way because of that.
Yeah, but they're in the water, of course, and the pressure is pushing down and they're uncomfortable and they're trying to get away from it, and they're not liking it, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, did that thinking like a fish. We have a question from Don. Eric, you mentioned chartreuse and white being two colors that you frequently use, and he'd like to know why those are your top choices, and if other colors work for blue catfish and snakehead.
Yeah, well, what I'm looking at with the white is these predators are eating fish. Fish like to eat fish, and they're either eating shad, a shad spawn, small shad, or they're eating perch, and they're eating minnows. So I can use maybe, I usually use white, but and the chartreuse. And the chartreuse, if I recall reading about fish studies on those, they actually see the chartreuse as a brighter white. They don't see it as a green. So it's going to be a white color still to them. And then also, if you're fishing deeper, if you're fishing a chartreuse, of course, the sun rays don't go so deep. So you want a brighter white down below so they can still see that white. And then also, what I'll do is I'm fishing shallower water, I'll look and try matching the hatch sometimes. If I see a lot of greenish colored bait, or if I see bluish colored bait, what they're feeding on, I may try to change that. I don't use much in the way of flex in the plastics. If I want something flashy, I'll do a spinner bait with a white on it, or you can use a MEP spinner with a white blade on it. Or like I said, the white plastics, the frogs. I think basically what they're looking for there is like if you bring them across, if you're fishing for largemouth bass or any kind of fish that's hiding in the pads, they're looking up, especially snakehead, their eyes are on top of their head. So they're kind of like sitting down and they're viewing above. Lily pads are transparent. They may not appear to us, but as a bait moves across the top, they can see that shadowing. And they'll see the shadowing and see the wake of the bait and the shadowing. So keep that in mind, and they may follow it for a bit. If you really pay attention, sometimes you'll see those pads on a calm day, you'll see them bump and move. And I'm always wondering, is that a turtle or is that a fish down there? And I'm going to take the cast. So, if you see something out of the ordinary, if you hear something out of the ordinary, don't hesitate to take a cast. Cast beyond it, bring your bait through it. If it doesn't get bit, take a cast. Keep, like I said, keep 4 rods ready. I keep about 4 rods ready: a top water, a weighted swim bait, a chatterbait, or a spinner bait, so I can fish in the water column and depend upon where I want to be. So if I don't get bit the first time, I'll cast again and maybe run it down a little bit shallower. And it's dependent on too, if I'm fishing 2 foot of water or 8 feet of water, how far I can actually go and entice a bite. And I always like to say, don't fiddle too much with tying new baits on and doing things like that, because if your bait's not in the water and you're tying a bait, you're not going to be catching fish. You got to have your bait in the water to catch the fish.
To add to that real quick, yeah, so you're pretty spot on with the chartreuse. I've done a lot of research on fish vision before, and I'm starting a project studying the senses of snakeheads. But a lot of fish species, particularly like largemouth bass, they don't have the receptors to see the color yellow. But and so it appears white, but it appears glowing white because it's a fluorescent color. Fluorescent, if something is fluorescent, that means it absorbs light of one wavelength and then re-emits it as another wavelength. It's different than bioluminescent, where that's just producing its own light, but it's similar. And so chartreuse will absorb like UV light and maybe blue light that can penetrate pretty deep, and then it'll re-emit it as visible light, and that'll make it appear like it's actually glowing to the fish. And similar to other colors like hot pink and like bright orange and other those neon colors, they do something similar. But specifically with the yellow, a lot of fish can't see yellow, so it just appears white and glowing.
Yeah, and also what I'll do sometimes with like a swim bait or the paddle tails, I'll fish one with a chartreuse tail on it, or a pink tail, or a red tail. That way they get a different, they may be focusing in on it at that point, or it may be something that as going through the water, it's another flash that they're seeing, and they'll attack it too.
Yeah, thank you so much. Oh, go ahead.
Another question?
Yeah, we have one more question that we're at 7:55, so we're gonna wrap up with this one. If we have time for one more after it, we'll take it. We have a question from Melissa, and she's asking, what's your favorite way to cook blue catfish? And I'm actually gonna add on to that, because one of the things I always get like asked when I talk to people about snakehead is they're so ugly. Can you actually eat them? So if you guys could share if you have a favorite recipe, or yeah.
For me, I fish so much that fish just go bad in the freezer. So I donate those fish. With snakehead, I harvest every single one of them. When I'm fishing for them, I get them in the net. I carry a little bat with me, crack them in the head, cut the gill arcs, put them on a stringer. If they wake back up, they're going to drown in the water because they can't get a breath. And I donate them to a bird sanctuary that feeds them to eagles and things like that. Or if I know somebody that wants one, I'll, of course, put it in a cooler and then take it to them for them to eat. With respect to the catfish, I try harvesting every one of those. I have a friend of mine that he has a farm, and what I do normally is I'll have like buckets of them, 1 bucket or 2 buckets of them, and I'll stop on the way at some of the bait shops and stuff or places and ask, hey, do you want these fish? If they don't take them, I take them to his farm, and the eagles and the other birds of prey come down and feast on them. And the fox do as well.
Yeah, that's what I like to say about snakeheads is people are like, oh, like, focus on eating the catfish, but people are like, oh yeah, ew, snakehead's so gross, how could you eat it? And my response to that usually is, do you ever go look at a cow and you're like, that's a sexy animal, I want to put it in my mouth? No, it doesn't matter what it looks like on the outside, it matters how it looks and it tastes on the inside. And snakehead has this beautifully white, firm meat that's like halibut. It's really, really firm, and so you can cook it. I've had it in ceviche, I've had it in stews, fried, baked, broiled. You could cook any way you want because it holds up so well because it's firm, white, and not fishy at all.
And it takes on the flavor of what you're preparing it with. It holds that really well, and it's a nice firm meat, and there's no fishy taste to it. It's nice, sweet.
Yeah, actually, so let me grab one prop. I'll show you what I've been cooking all my snakehead with lately.
While he's away, when I clean snakehead, I like to use electric knife because it's so slimy. To get it over quick, because rather than trying to cut it, the electric knife cut, it's oscillating on its own. So you just cut down and cut over, flip it over, then skin it off, and then you've got yourself a nice fillet.
And so what I've been using for snakehead and blue catfish and a lot of other fish too is just, I found a really simple way. If you don't have any time, you get the store-bought what is this Delalo sun-dried tomato, basil, and cheese pesto, and I just really cake that onto the fillet on a baking sheet, pop it in the oven or the air fryer for 10 minutes on 400. Comes out with this nice little crust. Maybe I put some breadcrumbs on top of it, and it's just so good, super easy to make. You don't even need to be a chef, you can just do it super easily. Yeah,
and you can eat all sizes of them. I mean, there's depending upon what you want, so keep them all and fillet them up and eat them. They're great.
Yeah. Oh my goodness, that recipe sounds delicious. Now I'm gonna have to go and get myself some of that. So
you just get it at the grocery store.
I will have to. I will be looking forward to the next time I have some snakehead and blue catfish too. So we are at the top of the hour. Thank you guys both for being with us tonight. Eric and Dr. Bressman, this has been such a wonderful learning experience. As we wrap up, we're gonna finish with one final of Steve Ward's poems, and this one is called Signs of Spring. And again, Steve Ward is one of the two brothers in Chris Fieldlum and Steve that pioneered the art of decoy carving. All right, Signs of Spring. The fishermen are skinning bark from off their fish trap poles and boiling tar to smear the seine and patching up the holes. The smell of copper fills the air, and they all smile and sing, for this is how the fishermen know that it is spring. They have to see no calendar to know that spring is here, for the cormorant are coming in from points both far and near. And then, too, a fishhawk circles gracefully above the foam, screaming out his joyous message, spring is here, and I am home. And the fishermen are driving poles as if they were all mad to trap the run of herring, the hardheads, and the shad. Although it is February and the cold nor'westers sing, the fishermen are merry, for they know that it is spring. All up and down the Chesapeake, the west and eastern shore, from old Cape Charles way down the bay, clear up to Baltimore. You can smell the tar pots boiling, you can hear the draw knives ring. When the fishermen start toiling on their nets, you know that it is spring. And I love that poem so much. It's such a wonderful ode to Chesapeake fishing and culture. Really quickly, actually, before we totally wrap up, Dr. Bressman, do you want to plug the Sharptown Cherry Beach tournament?
Yeah, so that's what I wanted to plug event. I just posted the link in the chat. My lab is hosting on July 23rd at Cherry Beach Park in Sharptown, Maryland on the Eastern Shore. We're hosting an invasive species fishing tournament where there's categories for snakeheads, blue catfish. There are kayak divisions, boat divisions, there's shore-based division if you want to fish from shore. So tons of prizes for everybody. It's totally free to enter. It's sponsored by Salisbury University, is paying for it to help, is paying for it. And if you don't have any fishing gear, don't know how to catch these fish, we've got gear you can borrow, and you can catch we can show you how to catch these fish, show you how to fillet them, show you how to cook them. There'll be a free fish fry afterwards too, where you can try these fish, see how good they are, so that you go out and keep catching them more and eating more. All the fish caught in this tournament will be used, at least some of their parts will be used for my lab's research. But if you want to keep the rest of your fish, we mostly just need the guts, like the stomach and their gonads, stuff that you're probably not going to eat anyway. So then we can give you back the rest of the fish so you can cook it at home and take it for yourself. Yeah, so check it out and follow that link as we'll be sharing more details and updates as we keep going.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dr. Bressman. And if you stop by the tournament, you will see me there. I will definitely be at that tournament. I hope to fish it. So thank you so much, everybody, for being here with us tonight. Thank you from all of us at Interfaith Partners for the Chesapeake and FishTalk Magazine. And anybody whose questions we didn't get to in the chat, we're going to send a follow-up email with the link to this recording and the questions as well. And with that, thank you so much and have a wonderful evening.
All right.